Hello, thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is going to be about how to build a scene in Harmony Premium from scratch. My name is Desi. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Toon Animation, and today's webinar will be hosted by Genevieve Demers. Genevieve Demers is our star artist. She does all of our great scenes and scene files that you would see up on our website and in different demo material. Genevieve has many years of experience in the industry, and really she is a master at Harmony, and Harmony Premium is really the jewel of the industry in which most of the big studios use. So really today is a great sneak peek into seeing how most big studios would use the software to build a scene. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jen, but also a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be online within a couple of days. If you have any questions, you can always type them into the question section of the control bar of the GoToWebinar panel. And you can also always email us at webinars@toonboom.com, and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions regarding this webinar or any other technical questions about the software. So I'm going to pass it over to Jen now, and we really hope you enjoy this webinar.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be doing this webinar for you guys today. We are going to be making, as Desi was saying, a scene from scratch today with nothing at all, and then building up to getting a full scene in there. So for this webinar, we're going to be going at a slightly fast pacing. So if ever, when we get to the end of this webinar, you feel like, oh, wow, that went by really fast. Well, it's entirely normal, okay? Making a project from scratch within 45 minutes is quite a big objective. So of course you'll get access to this webinar afterwards if you want to be able to see it again and watch it a little bit more slowly at home. And you'll also get access to plenty of other tools such as the docs.toonboom.com, which is our document where our documentation resides, as well as the learning channel on our website, which is learn.toonboom.com, which is currently in beta, but still has plenty of information for you guys to see. Now let's start right away, since we don't have that much time. I've got my Harmony Premium window open right here. I'm just going to press OK as work offline, which is going to keep my scene local on my computer. And so right here, I'm able to name my scene, so I'll just do that right away. And see scene Jen. We have the path where my scene is going to be located. You can always browse and put it somewhere else. And these settings right here, so the resolution portion of my settings for my new scene, this can always be changed later on in Harmony, so you don't really need to worry about it. Of course, having your base settings is always a good thing, but since vector drawings are resolution independent, and we'll be using vector today, these can always be changed later on. So let's go right ahead and create our new scene. And now we see that the interface has popped up like this. Let's see. So we can pull on these little bars right here to make the windows bigger or smaller. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different views inside of my my Harmony window, and I can get as many of these as I want, or as few of these as I want. Of course, you can make them bigger or smaller. You can also remove some of them by, if you see the upper right corner of each window or of each view, you get the little X and the little plus. The little X is going to remove the currently selected view. And if I press plus, it's going to bring down a menu from which I can select all the different views that we have inside of Harmony. Now we won't go too in-depth about all of these. We're mainly going to be using some of the ones that are enabling us to really quickly create a project while understanding a little bit better some of the features that the software have and to be able to understand them. Now, if when closing a view you want to add it back again, you can just press on the plus and bring it back in. And if you desire to change it to a different place, you don't necessarily need to close it and bring it back up again in the other view. You can just grab that window, drag it over to another tab, and you just drop it on that tab, and it's going to move its location to the new tab right here. So if you wanted to create an entirely new view, remember I said that right now at the present time we have 4 different views, as we can see, as they get highlighted by that red frame around it. If I wanted to create another one, for example, the node view, let's go and get that one, and I can grab that tab, bring it over, and you can see depending on where I position it, it sort of gives me the location of where that future view is going to take place. If I let go, I've created for myself a brand new tab here, a brand new view, and from here I'll be able to just work as well by being able to see it. So first things first, when we start our project, usually what we do is we have a storyboard. At the present time, we won't have a storyboard for the webinar. We're just going to create a little layout of how we want our scene to look. And usually how I go about it is that I'm going to use the brush tool. See, we have all the drawing tools over here on this toolbar. So I'm going to use the brush tool to sketch a little something. And if you're wondering, if you're not too familiar with vector usage, the difference between the brush tool and the pencil tool, we're just going to go a little bit quicker in. If you see at what's happening here, my camera frame is zooming in closer or zooming in farther away. The shortcuts for doing this is 1, to move further back, and 2, to move in closer. Just as with any other software, if you press down the space bar, you have the hand right here. That enables you to move around your setting right here. So you're not moving the camera frame, you're only the one physically moving around your frame to be able to see a greater portion of your scene. So as I was mentioning, the reason why I'm using the brush instead of the pencil, we just create 2 strokes really quick, one with the brush and one with the pencil right here. We can see that both have a nice little thick and thin effect. If I go to my contour editor, which is allowing me to select my vector points, I can see that in the pencil line, the vector is at the very center, meaning that if I want to grab one of these points and move it around, it grabs my entire line. So it is keeping the thickness by doing this. So if I wanted, I could even select some points, remove some, or play with the Bezier handles of each of those points and still keep that nice curve if I wanted to. When it comes to the brush tool, however, the vector is on the exterior of my line. So modifying a brush line is a little bit harder. If you go and pull on some of those points, you might kind of lose that neat little curve that you had before. So it's a lot more tweaking. So let's get rid of that information right here, and let's go ahead and start on our scene. So I was thinking of having maybe a couple of waves. So we'll have little waves like this. Maybe I'll make one like this, and then just come and grab my select tool. I'm going to copy that, paste it, and then we can just use the arrows maybe to move it to the side a little bit. And let's copy that. I'm going to try and keep it pretty even. And do another one. So we've got our nice wave here. And I'd like to have, you know, several rows maybe of waves. Let's do 2 for now, and later on, if we want to add more, we can go ahead. If you want to keep it even while using the select tool and resizing, make sure that you hold down Shift. Otherwise, you'll be able to kind of squash it and stretch it. So if you press down Shift, you're going to get the same proportions on both of your waves. So now we have that, and maybe we'd like to have a little sun somewhere in the background. And what if between those 2 waves, I'd like to have a little buoy? Right now my scene is kind of starting to get crowded a little bit, so we have the waves over here, and if I want to draw my buoy and it auto flattens and I want to remove some of the information that I've created, it might come in conflict with the waves. So one way you can go about this is to use the different art layers. Now the art layers are this bar right here. So in this one we have 4 different layers. Now the default setting is to have just 2, with line art as your current layer, and you have color art over here. So essentially you have 4 layers. The overlay is always what's closest to the camera, so what comes out on top of your camera view right here. The line art is the default setting for your drawing, so the wave and the sun at the moment are set to be on the line art. We have the color art, which is under the line art, and the underlay, which is happening exactly at the very bottom of this drawing. So this is essentially 4 layers inside our drawing cell that we have inside of our timeline right here, our drawing information. So if I want to create some new art without having any of this in the way, I can go to my color art, maybe, to come and create that art. If I want to see just my buoy as I draw without having any of this, I can click on the this button right here, current drawing on top. And this is actually pretty helpful also if you're drawing objects with other perhaps BG elements coming in front, and you want to pop that image that you're working on at the very top of your screen so that you don't get distracted by anything else, then you can just click on this. Right now I'm no longer seeing my waves. If I wanted to be able to see it, I can also preview all of my art layers right here. So for now we'll keep this one activated, and we're going to be creating our buoy on the color art. So we can get sketching right away. You'll notice that blue outline in here when inside the color art. So the reason for this is because it's only showing me the strokes. So it's showing me the pencil, not the pencil, but the brush along with the strokes that I'm using. So the contour stroke, or this blue thing right here. Now the way that you can activate this mode is by pressing down K. So if I turn it on or off, usually it's on by default in the color layer. So we'll do our buoy here. Maybe have a little something like this. There we go. Let's say we're happy with that. We can turn off the show strokes mode if we're a little bit distracted by it. Essentially, the show strokes is to identify whether or not my shape is closed when it comes to painting my shapes. Right now with the sketching, we don't really need it. So for the sketching of my storyboard right here, usually the color that I'm using, you'll notice that I just grabbed my brush and right away I had a black opaque color right here for my storyboard or for my layout. And if I go to color, so my color tab right here, right here I have a palette called the same thing as my scene. So the reason for this is that when I create a new scene, I get a default palette created along with it. It's always going to have these 6 colors in it. Now there is in no way any obligation for you to keep this palette. You could always remove it with the options that we have right above here with remove palette. And you can always create a new palette as well. Usually I keep the original palette if I want to do a little layout like this, but I'll create a new palette for creating my assets, and it really varies on the approach of people for doing something like this. Some people will like to have one palette per asset. For example, I could have one palette for the buoy, I could have one palette for the waves, one palette for the sun, and so on. So let's give it a shot real quick and create our new palette. So I'll create it. Let's create one for the sun real quick. So we'll set it as a scene palette. So we have a new palette added to our list right here. So this is the list of the palettes that we have, and this is going to be the list of colors inside each palette. So right now I have my palette Sun. I can come and change the color of that palette by simply double clicking on the swatch right here. And I can choose the multi-wheel maybe to be able to see, to be accessing a little bit easier all the colors that I have in here. And in terms of feature, I can go and use the color picker. If I wanted a specific color, even if it's one outside of the Harmony window, I believe if you click on the color picker, hold it down, and then go to your object, and once you have the color that you want, you just let go. Oops, I dragged my mouse a little bit there, but you go to your color, you let go, and then it's going to find that exact RGB that you want. You also have alpha in here, alpha channel that you can change if you want to add some transparency to your color. And we have, let's say for the sun, we'll use a gradient. So the gradient, if I click on this, I can use the color that I have, and those 2 little arrows that you have underneath, you're able to come and choose a color from here. So maybe I'll make that a little golden yellow right here. You can have it set as linear, as radial, and if you want to change the appearance of your gradient, you can come and play with those a little bit, maybe even change them to a different place or something. So that is how you'd be adding your color. Once you're happy, you can just close that box and it's going to save it over here. Of course, always a good idea to go and rename your colors if you don't want to get lost into the sea of colors that you're going to have in here. And once you have your palette, you're ready to go and paint your assets. But right now we don't really have any assets. We only have our little storyboard. Let's actually rename this one storyboard. So I can do so from the timeline, or I could do it as well from the node view. The timeline and the node view are really hand in hand. The node view is essentially a visual representation of what's happening in the timeline, but without the timing portion. So if we want to create some new drawing layers, at the present time I have just my storyboard, and you can see that if I were to create new drawings, I would only be able to go from frame to frame. So that's not exactly what I want. I want to be able to see them all on the same frame, and I don't really want to use the art layers for this. I want each of my assets to have their own drawing layer right here. So in order to do so, I'm going to create new drawing layers, which are represented by this little symbol right here. So we have the circle, the triangle, and the square, which represent our drawing layers. And if we look for that button, we can see one right here. So add drawing layer, and I can use this one by pressing on it. The shortcut, by the way, if you're really heavy onto shortcuts, you can come over here and press Command R. I believe the shortcut on PC is Control R, and from here you get the same window that's booted right here. So we can name our drawings. So let's say we have sun, and from here we can just press enter, and it's going to add and not close the window. And you can see that already it's getting added in here. We have our sun, we have the buoy, we have wave number 1, and we have wave number 2. From here I can close this. Now we can see that we have all of our different drawing layers that have been created, and it reflects as well in our node view right here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So we have all of these connected with little noodles onto our composite. And let's put them in the order that they were originally brought in. Now from here, all the drawing layers are connected in a way, in a specific way on the composite. The order in which things are being read inside the camera. So not only is there art layers that are being read from top to bottom, so overlay, line art, color art, and underlay. Each of these 4 layers are contained within each drawing of your drawing layers. It can be a bit of a mind warp at first, but trust me, eventually you'll get the hang of it. So the way that these are connected to the composite is that the first drawings over on the left side are going to be read at the top. So it's kind of like reading. Everything over on the left comes out first. And the further I go on my composite, the further back it's going to move from my scene right here. So at this point, let's do our sun, since we've already created a color for it. Maybe I want to create a circle. So I'll take my ellipse tool. The ellipse tool, rectangle, line, and polyline, these all work according to the pencil line. So usually when I do cleanup, I like to use the pencil line because one of the main reasons for this, right now I'm holding down shift to do my, my ellipse, and if I go and take my select tool afterwards, I can move this around. And if I go back to my tool properties, remember when I said that having the tool properties open, depending on which tool you're using, is always a great asset, is that when you're selecting pencil line, you have the possibility of changing the size of your pencil line. So I could come and make it bigger, smaller, or even invisible if I set it to 0. And this is a great asset because this, you can't do it with the brush tool. So if I select a brush tool, once it's already been drawn, I won't be able to modify it. So always a great asset when cleaning up your drawings on your main asset to have them drawn as pencil line. So from here I can take my paint bucket. I'm going to go back to my color, take the sun, and just paint the interior of it. If I wanted to modify that gradient, of course I can do it from the color swatch itself, because when you're creating a color swatch, if you go and paint it somewhere, that color is linked to the places where you've painted it. So it has some sort of color ID that is always going to be kept throughout your entire scene, so that if you need to change the color of your sun, maybe add another color in there by just clicking under, then I can come and add that, and it gets added in here right away. So I could come and change that, no problem. Now, once we have our asset created here, if we wanted to start doing the other ones, because we don't we only have so much time, I've actually created some of these assets in advance so that we can avoid having to redraw all of this, because it would probably take the entire webinar just to do this. So I'm going to get rid of these assets for now, and I'm going to bring up a different view from my window up here, and we're going to bring the library view. Now, I've already created all of my assets over here inside one of my folders, and the library is essentially going to give you access to that. It's giving you access to your drawing substitutions, which is essentially the content of each of your drawing layers. If you had multiple ones, you could see all the drawing cells that you've created in here, so all the drawings that are inside of your timeline or not. And in addition, you get access also to any folder inside of your computer to be able to bring in other assets as well. So it's always a good idea to go and back up the different stuff that you do in case you want to reuse it in other scenes. So to be able to bring in an asset, you can simply right-click and go and select Open Library. And when you select Open Library, you actually get access to any folder on your computer. So any place where you want to store your files, you could just go over here, and I could decide, well, you know what, I'll take this one and choose that folder, and it gets added in here, where I can see, for example, I have a rig here. When you get that little Lego block, it's not something that I've drawn. You need to right-click and select Generate Thumbnail in order to see a little preview of your character or your asset in here. So depending on what the preview is, right now I'm doing a character, like a full rig, so it takes a little bit more time, but for my other templates, which I've already imported right here, I can see them, and I could generate these really quickly because they're just one drawing. So to create a template, it's really simple. Like any asset or any portion of your drawing, if you want to keep full assets, usually I like to do it from the node view, but you could also do it from the timeline. You would just go and copy this, Command C. And if I want to go and paste it in here, you'll notice that over on the left side right here, I have a little lock next to my folder. I can right click on that and select Write to Modify. This is essentially just because you don't want to end up pressing delete by mistake on anything that you've created and losing it. So now the little lock is gone. I can press Command V to go and paste it. And now I've templated my storyboard right here. So you always need to generate your thumbnails just the once. And once you've done that, you get a little preview. And that preview is actually stored inside of your template, so you don't need to do it every single time that you reopen the software. So now we have all of our assets. Let's start bringing them in. You could either click on it and drag it over in either the camera view, the timeline, or the node view. Usually I do everything from the node view. So I'm bringing in my buoy. I have it here. I'm going to move these over a little bit because I have quite a few assets in here. I have my sky, the clouds. Oops. I have my clouds right here. And let's take all of my waves and bring them in. So we have wave 1, 2, 3, 4. And these are white little groups, so they're not the same color as the blue, but you'll notice that there's an arrow going inwards right here, meaning that there's several assets in here because I've decided to group them up so they don't take too much room inside of my node view. Okay, make this a little bit bigger so we get a little more room to see what we're doing. So I have my waves. Let's connect these to my composite. Right now I'm just putting them in the same order as I had before, and you'll notice that I've drawn them all on the same layer. They're all one on top of each other right now. I have my one wave right here. Let's make this bigger. So if I take this one and I want to be able to see the one that's under, right now I can't because they're all one on top of each other. Now if I want to make a little bit more sense, we want to bring the buoy in front of the sky, because right now it's sitting at the very back. So for now, let's say that this is doing good for me. And I've actually forgotten my sun. There we go. Let's connect that behind the clouds. That would make more sense. There we go. So the sky is sitting at the very back. We have the sun and so on. So you'll notice that it also changed the order of how things were positioned inside of my timeline. And this is exactly what I want. Now from here, to be able to move those assets, I don't necessarily want to go into my select tool and start moving things around. When it comes to animating certain assets, Sometimes you're going to have to reposition some of these without modifying the drawing. And the way that you can do this, I'm just going to bring back up my not my tool properties, but my coordinates. And let's bring these over here. So coordinates and control points. This is essentially something that all of your layers can have. And the best way that I found to explain this is that by selecting, for example, all of my waves right here, so I'm doing this from the node view, you can add to each of those waves a peg that will enable me to move these in the scene without modifying the drawing by just putting coordinates on them. Quick and easy shortcut for you to add a peg on multiple items at the same time. You do Command-Shift-P on Mac or Control-Shift-P on PC. So right away I get this little green node that connects itself above all of each and every one of my waves. So they each have their own peg, meaning that they can each have their own coordinates, separate coordinates on those. So to be able to position those in my camera, I could take my peg, move it, and you can see now that I have a second wave sitting at the back of this one. Now, to come and position them, I want to do something a little bit special for this project. I want to bring my waves further away to get that sense of depth when I do something like a camera move. So the way I can do this, I'll bring in another view, bring in the top view right here. And you also get access to the side view if you want as well. We have this over here. I kind of like working in the top view. It gives me a general view of what I want. And when I select one of my pegs, you see that right now at the present time, all of my elements are set to be on the 0 line. So no matter which one I choose, they're all going to be on that flat line right here. So if I select my first wave, and I come over here, I can press, I can either go to my top view and press on the up and down arrows to bring them back or forward. And you can see that as I bring it forward, it becomes bigger. The reason for that is actually quite normal. It's just how perspective works. If you look at your hand from afar and you bring it closer to your face, it's going to get bigger. And this is quite normal. We'll see in a little bit how to prevent this from happening from assets that you want to remain the same size. But for now, let's keep positioning our waves. So the second one we'll leave at 0 level, and we'll just push the other ones further back. So I'm just grabbing each of my waves, pushing them further back. Now we don't necessarily see right away the final result that we'll be getting, but at the present time we'll just push those back. And if we're taking a quick look at our node view right here, you'll notice that by pushing some of these back and forward, we haven't changed the order on the composite. This is because the Z value, the Z depth, overrides the connections on your composite. So the default ones are still in there, but if I were to just select all of my pegs and reset them, they would just go back to 0 value all around. So the order still remains the same and still needs to go back to this position. So it's kind of like a safe ground if you need to reset at some point. And also, you may have noticed how I've reset these is just by using a quick shortcut. I'm selecting all the pegs that have information on it. And by pressing Shift-R, you can reset that position. So let's go over to our camera now for each wave. And I'll move the first wave down a bit. I'll move the third one, oops, up a bit. And right now I can't see my third wave. You may have noticed I'm bringing it up and down and I'm not seeing anything. And the reason for that is I do have other assets in here and they're all set to 0. So I'm going to have to create a peg for each of these as well. So Command Shift P, excuse me. So Command Shift P for creating multiple pegs on multiple layers. So we have a peg for each of these now, and we're going to bring the sky back, for instance. But if I bring my sky back in my top view, I don't necessarily want it to get smaller because right now it's smaller than my camera frame. So one thing that you can do, let me just reset that with Shift R, is that from your animation tools right here, which is this toolbar, you have multiple tools, all of which are contained in the transform tool as well, but we have one called the maintain size tool. And when I use this on my layer, it resizes it at the same time as it's pushing it back so that it's going to keep its original size. So I can do that with my sky right here. If I wanted to push the sun and the clouds by the same amount, I could either go and copy the keyframe that's been created on my pegs. So those little keys of information are represented in the timeline by the little square that we find right here on my sky peg. And when I'm, removing that keyframe, I'm essentially just bringing it back to its original level, so resetting the current position. So instead of, going to copy and paste that keyframe, another thing you could do, if we reset that to 0, is we could create a peg that controls the clouds, the sun, and the sky to all be on the same value. So by selecting these, instead of going Control Shift P this time, I'll just do Command P. And this creates a peg that controls all 3 of these. So when I select that peg, I'm able to move all 3 at the same time. Let me just go back to my camera here. So all 3 are moving at the same time. And if I want to move them inside the top view using the maintain size tool, I can just bring those back as far away as I want so that it doesn't interfere with any of my other assets in here. And instead of having coordinates on 3 assets, I only get 1 on this one, and everything sitting under is going to be affected. So everything connected to that peg. It's kind of like a mobile, really. So from here, now that all of my assets are positioned, I can keep on moving my waves a little bit up. We're just going to reposition those quickly inside the camera because they're already positioned in depth. And last but not least, here's the other one. So now if I wanted to move my buoy to be sitting behind a specific wave, I could do that as well, or just simply reposition it to where my storyboard is. And you'll notice if I want to put it in the same angle, right now I'm getting kind of a funny rotation where it's rotating from this point right here. And it's not necessarily something that I want. So what I can do to reposition that pivot point, if you do so using the transform tool, I go in here and reposition it. Now we might not be able to see that well, but we get a little ghost of our pivot point right here, meaning that if I unselect this and select my buoy again, the pivot point is going back to where the ghost was located. So one of the things that you can do to remedy that and to really set a permanent pivot point is that you can get one of your animation tools. For example, usually I like to take the rotate tool for this. And let's actually turn off the waves just a second so we don't get too much. And let's turn off the rest as well. Just repositioning our pivot point. Usually what I want to do is have it at the base of my buoy so that when I rotate it using my peg, oops, I take my peg, grab my rotate tool, bring it over to this position right here. Grab my rotate tool and bring it over to this position right here. And now if I unselect my buoy, reselect it, the pivot point will be at the right place. So if I want to just tilt it a little bit when I do my animation, I'll be able to. Now let's reactivate these. By the way, deactivating, you simply select the nodes and press D to deactivate and A to reactivate everything. The same goes for inside of your timeline right here. You are able to deactivate certain assets by pressing on the set of eyes right here. So if I were to unselect, for instance, the buoy, it would hide itself. And to bring it back up, I can just click on the eyes right here. So now that we've repositioned our buoy, let's go forward with animating the entire thing. So let's turn back on, whoops, move my clouds a little bit there in the process. So let's turn this back on and start animating our scene. Right now at the present time, I can turn off my storyboard because, you know, it's only one frame. If you did have multiple ones in there, it could be a good asset to be able to see the thing as you're working, but eventually you see that it starts having a little bit of too much information in here. So we can verify just the depth of our scene. If everything is positioned properly, we can see from the top view. We can go into the perspective view as well, which is another view right here that we have. And pressing Command Alt, see how I'm able to see how my assets are positioned. So I can actually see the depth of my scene like this. Now, going back to my camera view, because I want to be working from here when I do my animation, you know what, maybe my buoy is a little bit close. It's a gigantic buoy. I'll push it back a little and maybe make it smaller with my transform tool. There we go. Okay, and we can fix the camera a little bit later on. If anything, you don't need to scale all of your assets to be able to accommodate your camera frame. You can just fix the camera later on. Now moving on to animation, if I want to start animating, right now I already have coordinates on these pegs, enabling me to position them in depth. So these have, if I go back to my coordinates view, values in depth and a little bit in up and down as well. So south for this one, and I would have north for these here. So just so I don't end up conflicting anything with those pegs, I'm going to create some new ones for creating my actual animation. So we'll press Control Shift P or Command Shift P on Mac, by having these pegs selected, and it creates another one that goes atop each of these. So for animating these pegs, let's start with our first wave. So when we positioned our layers beforehand, you may have noticed that when we have our wave right here, when we positioned it, it gave us a little keyframe. So we're going to do the same thing with this one. So the peg just above the other one. When we move it, right away it creates a keyframe information in here. So if I would go about this the right way, we would create a keyframe over here. If we want to make sure that we have a keyframe, in the timeline toolbar right here, we have this little button, Insert Keyframe, which even if we haven't moved our asset, we'll be able to add a keyframe in there at the still position. Now, going forward in my timeline, if I were to move my wave and create another keyframe, then I have two positions to my waves. Two positions right here. Right now they don't have any interpolation between the two of them. But if I were to go back to my timeline view, I have set motion keyframe. So right now my playhead is between those two keyframes. So if I press on that, we get that little line right here being traced between the two of them. Wow, I get my son kind of flashing right there in the background. Right now we have those two keyframes right here, and it's kind of just going from one position to another without much, without being very dynamic, I would say. So one of the ways what we can do it when we do something a little bit more freehand, a little bit more organic, is that I like to set my pegs to a specific setting called 3D path. So the 3D path is going to give me a much smoother curve. So for things like animating anything that will follow a specific trajectory and to be a little bit smoother, this will definitely come in handy. So the way that you can set your pegs to the setting, right now we'll set multiple ones. So again, I'm only clicking and dragging to select all of these. And I'll bring up my node toolbar by right-clicking at the top here of my node view. And I'll select node view. So most views end up having a toolbar like this that you can use and have multiple features that are useful in that specific view. The one that I'll be using is going to be set properties on many layers. So I'm going to click on that and set these pegs as 3D path mode. I'm just going to press OK from here. So I'll go ahead and animate the first wave. There's no sense in trying to animate them all at the same time. We'll start off on our first frame. And from here, again, I'll create a keyframe either using the button right here or by pressing F6, works as well. And I'll go one frame at a time and just move this a little bit up. I'll do a 4 keyframe cycle. So I have my first keyframe, second keyframe, then we go to frame 20. The wave's going to come down a little and forward. I'm going to do 10 frames at a time, and then it's going to go back down. And maybe we want to copy the first keyframe and then go and paste it at frame 40 right here. So our wave would go something like this, where it would move forward, crash back down, and then roll back to its original position. And we want that to cycle together. But before we start thinking about cycling it, we want to add the animation. So I'm just going to select all of my frames right here, and I'm going to paste that, not to paste, but I'm going to set the motion keyframe that I have right here. And now it's added the interpolation between my keyframes. So my wave is really following that circular motion like that. You could always come and tweak it a little bit, change your position after your keyframes have been created, and they would get updated as well. But pretty much once I'm happy with that cycle, where my wave is just circling around, I can come and copy this. We're going to do Control-C or Command-C on Mac. And selecting that first keyframe, I'm going to right-click and select Paste Cycle. So this will allow me to go and paste multiple times my scene. Right now my scene is a little bit short, so before we do that, we're going to make it a little bit longer than this. Let's take up a bit more space right here. So my scene is 60 frames long at the present time. I'm going to pull on the red thing here at the end, and let's make it about 200 frames long. So pulling it all the way to 200. But you'll notice that if I scroll through my timeline right here, everything disappears after frame 60. Now the reason for that is if I go to my sky, for instance, and find it in my timeline by pressing O, so always going to center on your selection. Now all of my drawing frames, this is the exposure of my drawing, is ending at 60. Now the way that we can extend this exposure is we'll go to the very end of our scene, and from here I can click and drag to select all the last frames of my scene and press F5 to extend the exposure, or you could right click and select extend exposure as well. So this will mainly just extend all of the exposition of the last drawing before the end of your timeline. So going back to our cycle, so we had our wave 1, which is right here. We're going to select those frames again, copy, go to our first frame, right click, and select paste cycle. And let's cycle it a couple of times, better more than not enough, because otherwise it will stop before the end of your scene. So once I'm okay with that, I can press OK. And then I get my wave cycling like this throughout the entire scene. Now at this point, if I wanted to have the same animation on my other frames, I could simply go and copy the entire timeline right here of my wave 1 peg. I'll just bring back my my node view so we can get a clearer aspect of what we're selecting, because sometimes these kind of all look alike a little if I haven't named them, which I probably should have. I'll take my second one right here. We're going to go to our frame 10, because we don't want the timing to be exactly the same. It might look a little bit funny. So we'll go to our frame 10 and press Command-V to paste. So what's happening here is now that I have my animation, you see how it's offset by about 10 frames. So we'll do that for all of our waves. Now, of course, for my second wave, I don't really have any animation at the very start. So to make sure that I can complete that animation, I would have to go and copy the keyframe just before my last and go and paste it in here to be able to to make the full circle for my entire scene. Now, let's do the same thing over again. I'm going to recopy this, go to our third wave, and we'll paste it at frame 20 for this one. We'll do the same thing for wave 4, but we'll do it frame 30. And last but not least, wave number 5. Let's find it inside of our timeline. We'll paste at frame 40 for this one. So copying and pasting. And of course, we need to go and fill out the beginning of that gap because there won't be any animation on those waves. But if I look just from frame 40 for this exercise, because we're already running a little bit short on time, if we just look now what's going on, all of my waves are kind of moving offset to one another. So once we're happy with the result of our waves, we could go and do the animation a little bit on our buoy, try to get it to follow the same movement as the wave. And even if I wanted to, I could take the connection of my buoy if I wanted, and let's say it's behind the 4th wave and the animation of my wave is over here. I could even decide to connect that peg to my buoy here, and what would happen is it would already follow the wave like this, because it's essentially just a hierarchy. So everything that affects this peg is going to affect both my wave number 4 and my buoy as well. So from here I could add additional animation to my buoy and maybe have it start from this position over here. Right now I'm just doing a little something real quick to show you guys how it would work. But ideally I would have to animate it throughout the entire scene. So maybe my buoy will tilt over a little bit as the wave moves up, and then it might come back a little back down like this. So I'm just adding the animation as I go, and see how it would be moving like this following the waves, but this peg is going to be affected by this one, but the animation on this one is still independent from the wave. You can see how I don't have any other keyframes being set on here. They're all on the wave peg. So this one right here. So to wrap up real quick, if at this point I want to add a camera to my scene, let's bring up a different type of library. Let's go get the node library, which is where all of your effect modules are going to be located. So in here we have everything from motion blurs to glows to the camera to cutters. There is really a huge list of effects that you can get in here, whether it's for rigs or for compositing or even rendering out your scene. All of these nodes are located inside of the node library. So if ever you get rid of one for some reason, you can always go back here and get a new one. So I usually like to use the search field for this because there is such an extensive list that sometimes you don't really know where you want to get it. So let's go get a camera for this one. We'll just bring it in over here. And whenever you get a green port right here sitting above an object, you can see if I click on it, you'll notice that it has the same color as one of the things that we use for motion, meaning a peg. So I'm going to select my camera and give it a peg by pressing Control P or Command P on Mac. And from here, I have my camera. So let's make sure that we're on the right frame, because right now the keyframes will be set on the current frame of my playhead. So from here with this camera, I can scale it kind of any way that I would with the transform tool, really. I could rotate it a little bit. Am I making you guys seasick yet? By having this, you can create the keyframes and create the coordinates on that peg for all of these. And as with any other peg, it's exactly the same. You can just reset it with Shift R. So let's do a little camera movement. Let's start over, say over here. And you can really get that sense of depth because we did a multi-plane scene, and you really can see it as you do the camera motion. So let's go over to the end of our scene and create another keyframe. Let's say we zoom in, and if you just look at the clouds in the back, you can see how, because we did a multi-plane, it tends to look much nicer, and we uncover details as we go. So my camera peg is at the very bottom here. Right now I have my 2 keyframes. So I'm just going to add the motion in between. And right now I can play my scene just like that. And I get my nice little smooth truck in to the end of my scene. One last thing that we'll see before we end this webinar is that we're going to see how to add a small glow to the sun. So adding basic effects like this. So I type in glow into my scene right here. I can just bring this one in. So this one is a blue module with 1 port up, 1 port down. And let's say we connect our sun in that port. I'm still keeping my other connection because if I unconnect it, it's going to simply disappear. And I'm going to put that at the back of my sun right here. Don't be afraid to move things around if you feel that it's starting to get a little bit too compact. So I have my glow connected behind my sun right here. So right now I'm not really seeing anything special. Maybe it's because my connection is at the very back. But another thing that you can do, and I encourage you to do so for most effects, is to turn on your render mode. Now the render mode is located right here. At the present time we're in OpenGL view. If you want the render view, you just click on the little colored flower. So if I press this, it's going to render out my current frame of my animation. So I'm actually getting a real preview of how this frame is going to look inside of my scene. Now the glow that we have here, if we click on the little yellow box, it's going to bring up the layer properties of that specific layer. So right now, as you can see, effects are sometimes very simple or sometimes very complex. Right now, this one has quite a few settings that I can tweak. So I have radius right here. If I go on if I go a little bit closer on my sun right here, I can pump up the radius by a good amount, and already you can see that we're getting some sort of effect by having this. The glow is connected to my sun, so maybe one thing that could be good is that if I can get the source color to be able to affect it. I could also come and tint my glow with a specific color. I could come and modify the intensity of that glow. So really often you have to kind of play around with the settings a little bit to figure out which is best for you. But remember that if you're not in in render mode, you're not going to be able to see it. So you really need to turn this on to get a really good glimpse of what your effect is going to look like. So let's say I'm happy with that. And now I'm ready to render out my scene. If I get out of render mode, I go back to my scene right here. I can do this in multiple ways. I can either go through File, Export, and I have multiple options in here that I can use. So I can export as a movie, I can export my layout image to be, if I wanted to have just the one image. And I can also go through my node view right here. I have a node called the right node. So the right node is pretty useful when you want to do several renders. Either you're planning on doing them multiple times as you go along. So you can set those settings in here. If I click on the layer properties to render out drawings, in which format you want them. If you want to render out a movie, these are all going to remain saved within your right node. So you choose a path, the name, and so on. And once you have these, you can go through File, Export, and you have, excuse me, and you have render right nodes. So every time that you open your scene, this will be saved, the right nodes. So if you've changed your information in there, it's always going to remain saved in there for you to use, and you'll be able to render either all of your frames, a selected portion of frames, if your scene is very heavy or you just want to get a specific preview of a certain part. And yeah, I guess that would be a crash course on how to create a scene from scratch. So we, unfortunately, we went a little overboard on the time right here, but we will be sharing this webinar on the on our website very shortly. And we will also make this template, so the scene, available for you guys to look at, play around with a little bit. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us at webinars@toonboom.com. And as I was saying at the beginning of this video, if you want to look further into certain information as well, the documentation website, docs.toonboom.com, that's DOCX, at toonboom.com, is available to you, as well as our learning portal, which is currently in beta version, but you'll find a lot of information there concerning the simplest thing, like creating a small storyboard in Storyboard Pro, all the way up to advanced rigging and advanced cutout animation. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you, Desi. And I will be looking forward to seeing you guys soon.